So I was wondering if anything has changed in publishing to allow you to publish your books this way now with all the colors, since I don't think it's coincidence that you're able to publish the remastered version of House of Leaves along with this book.
Did everyone hear the question? What's changed in publishing? You know, I'm not really sure. I mean, there's no question that the color technology has just gotten a lot more available, and I think they, you know, I think in some ways there's an element to publishing that's very old-fashioned, and there's a question of whether there's a place for all of this stuff. But I can't say that I am anywhere close to the forefront on that. I mean, you look at books by Chris Ware, other graphic novelists who are dealing with all sorts of colors and elements, you know, in that sense. I'm just bringing those techniques in a very specific, controlled way to, you know, a textual narrative. But I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, who knows? You know, I think we'll probably eventually have this kind of soft technology where the pages will actually be able to be configured. You'll be able to download books into books and things like that. You know, the form will still exist, but you know, I think there's a lot heading our way in the next 10, 20 years.
I'm especially interested in the collaborative process with your sister Annie and your father in regards to House of Leaves, and I'm wondering how each's individual art kind of impacted the book and the CD that
Right.
created.
You know, it was very organic. I would listen to tracks that she was working on, and that would influence me, or give me a sort of a tonal sense. Okay, you know, I mean, one of the things that my sister did bring out a lot more, I think, in House of Leaves through the course of the writing is the sadness that was inherent there. You know, there was something terrifying about this house, and there was that fight that was going on. And then I would hear my sister's early sketches of you know, Spanish Doll or elements like that, and it just sort of freed me up a little, and I was like, huh, that's a really nice tone, and that works well. And then she would read stuff, and then she'd go, oh, that's kind of cool, and then so that would sort of shape the way her song was forming, and it would kind of go back and forth like that, you know. I mean, it just always annoyed me when people would say it was the soundtrack for the book, because anyone who knows anything about soundtracks knows that it happens at the very end of the movie. And this was definitely much more of just she was influencing me, I was influencing her, and at the end they really sort of are a parallax view of a similar type of story. And the fact that they coincided the way they did was pure chance, you know. And the fact that we were able to market it in this connected way was by chance. I mean, there's no question she's been reading, you know, parts of Only Revolutions, you know, while I was writing it, and I was listening to bits that she was working on. But whether there will be a CD, I mean, there won't be a CD that coincides perfectly with this, obviously, but will there still be sort of a connective element there? You know, absolutely, you know, because it's inherent.
What about your father's influence on both of those works?
Well, I mean, my father was an intellectual. You know, my father believed in ideas. He believed that, you know, he came from a city that was leveled, where, you know, 200,000 people were killed, you know, deported to a camp. So for him, you know, ideas and theater and movies were provided a way for people to you know, to continue to believe in the world, I guess. And so, you know, we always sat around at the table, and he would talk about infinity, or he would talk about Fellini, or he would talk about the music of Nino Rota, or, you know, and he would bring home films that he'd gotten 16mm versions, and we would show them in our basement, and between reel changes we would discuss what was going on. And so for me, you know, image has always been very important, but I've also been taught firsthand the grammar of film, of how images work, and it's similar to language. You know, it's how you move a camera around, the angles, you know, create a certain space and stuff. I mean, I can read novels now and think, you know, this person doesn't even know where to put the camera, really. You know, it's the same kind of narrative setup for a particular, you know, scene. And in fact, and so one of the challenges with Only Revolutions was actually, in a way, going past that, because Sam and Haley are these sort of ever-present, always 16 teenagers. They are every race. They don't have one race. So you can read them and you can understand what they look like, but you couldn't film it. You couldn't draw it. People have already sort of given me drawings of Haley, you know, and they're great, but it's only Haley in one form. It's not Haley in all her forms, in all her shiftingness. So that was exciting to me because it was interesting how we could still visualize something that was impossible to visualize on a screen, for instance. And I think that's, for me, that's where the importance of novels lies and will lie. I'm pretty adamant about this, which is it's a place where you can have an experience that you can't get anywhere else. You know, I don't want to read a book that I see as a movie because it takes me a while to read that book. I want to read it. You know, I'd much prefer to see 2 hours, you know, and go, oh, I got that. And they did all the research on costumes and dialects and all. It's all done for me, you know. So I want to read something that gives me an experience that I can't get anywhere else because I'm going to be investing my time, I'm going to be investing my, you know, my whatever, my mind, my emotional spirit, and I want to be challenged in that way. So that's what I write, and that's what I think people ultimately, you know, want. You know, if you're going to spend 4 days, 2 weeks, you want something that's really going to give you something that's beyond what you could get on YouTube in 30 seconds.
What about the last page of House of Leaves and the tree? Something
No. I mean, I'm not gonna talk about the meaning of the text. You know, I will talk about the fact that you know, that's not what I do. I'm the writer, and I create you know, pieces that have a certain that resonate with meanings, right? And they're there for a specific reason. And so for me to come around and sort of start discussing that would be like Will Shortz sort of answering his own crossword puzzles, you know. And there, I just reduced House of Leaves to a crossword. Yes.
So when you were writing House of Leaves, did you have a meaning in your own mind, or were you were you conscientiously trying to keep everything as open as possible?
No, I definitely have a meaning. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it holds up. You know, I think people sense that. They sense the meaning. If you try to sort of pull the wool over someone's eyes, you know, they may not be able to specifically point to it, but they understand that there is a cohesive narrative there, and they respond to that. So, yeah, absolutely. A lot of mapping goes on with what I do. You know, mapping out the narratives, the dates, the history, all of the kind of backstory of that. You know, and it's not too elaborate. But this book, I actually had an entire page that had 360 grids on it. And I could actually see exactly how the histories correlated, and where the creek showed up, and Honey and Thomas's, and how the animals started speaking, and by the end, you know, were silenced by the own sense itself, and then a whole bunch of other stuff that I won't tell you about. But it was, you know, so for me, it's like that has to be there, you know, and then upon that foundation, everything else will grow. In the back.
You had said when you were just introducing it, you were talking about how the language is changing and the names are moving and all that. It seemed, you know, obviously the language is so gorgeous and word. How was it like to be writing that, trying to work with that kind of decay and look at it?
Did everyone hear the question? How was it like to work with that kind of language that was always shifting? It was hard, actually. I mean, even dealing with but I mean emotionally hard. It was hard dealing with the history. We tend to build narratives and explore narratives, and so to move through World War II and the Holocaust in 10 pages was crazy. It was depressing to me. I mean, it's just, you know, in some ways, everyone talks about how scared House of Leaves made them. I mean, this is a far scarier book in a way. It's like if you really wanted to imagine sort of how gods might really walk across the landscape, you know, they wouldn't stop for, you know, 222,000, you know, killed in a concentration camp on such and such a day. You know, it vanishes by them in a way. And certainly that's what narcissists do, and people who become self-involved, or countries who are narcissistic and self-involved. You know, they lose track of what's going on around them. So that was just a history. Then it was actually dealing with sort of the materialism of language. I realized that materialism, you know, one of the things that a lot of writers and poets hold on to is the fact that, you know, we're kind of above the material world. We work with words, and, you know, we don't really care about all of this other stuff. And I started to realize, like, basically with all things, that, you know, that even if you're not, you know, an avid shopper for shoes or technology or fetishizing cars, you still may be practicing materialism in your writing. So for me, it was that process of, like, how do we let go of language? How do we allow language its place and then let go of it? And that's very hard. We tend to want to hold on to something. So there's that cup, and then we reach for that cup, and then we drink from that cup, and then we put down that cup, and it kind of anchors that scene, possibly. Well, here, Sam reaches for a cup, he picks up a goblet, he takes a sip from a flute, he puts down a mug. You know, everything is letting go, constantly letting go of the shape of words. And then the other thing too, which is why I don't think this is a postmodern novel at all, is that postmodernism still, you know, its innovation in a way was to mix the high culture with low culture. But at the same time, it's still seized onto, you know, brand names and logos and everything. And you started to see that in hip hop and rap, you know, like something Hennessy and Cristal and, you know, and Escalade, or all of that was kind of held onto. So for me, it was about letting go of that too, letting go of logos and brand names and everything like that, and trying to get more of the music of language and how it floats everywhere. And at first, it was just such a crazy idea that I thought, oh, this is insane. But as I began to do research on the various teenage, you know, idioms throughout the decades, I began to hear that even though the words were all different, they actually had a similar music. You know, it was about, you know, describing their first amorous encounter. It was about the way they were hungry. You know, it was about how they were, where they wanted to go, and, you know. Though there was also one little difference which I always loved. There was a story in the 1920s about a Sunday school class, and the teacher up front was saying, she basically wanted to point out that all the temptations that Christ had faced were present in the modern times of the 20s. And she asked the class if they could think of a temptation that Christ didn't have to face. And a kid in the back raised his hand. It's always a kid in the back. And she said yes. He said, speed. So in many ways, that's where this book started.